My name is Ashley Parker Snider. I was a White House intern and then became a White House trip coordinator in the advance office during President Reagan's second administration. So as a White House trip coordinator, we put together the minute-by-minute schedule every time he left the White House, went on an international trip, did a Rose Garden event, a Room 450 event, anything outside the White House grounds, we were responsible for putting together the schedule for it. Everyone always asks about the president and how he was with staff and how he was as a person. And in 1988, I was the lead on an in-town movement, as we called it. It was Mrs. Reagan's birthday, and they were going to the Kennedy Center to see Les Miserables. And at the intermission, we took Mrs. Reagan downstairs where the cast had a big cake for her, and they sang happy birthday, and it was really very cool. So we got him back to the presidential box, and all of a sudden I got word from the agent backstage to hold them in the box because I don't know if you've seen Les Miserables or not, but there's a big barricade scene in the second act, and something had triggered the dogs, and so they were going to re-sweep the barricade because they couldn't be sure if it was, the fake or something more. And so we held the president in the box, and time was going by to the point where Jim Kuhn kind of looked at me and I said, the agents asked us to hold, and he said, okay. And the president and his guests were having champagne and having a nice time. And one of the guests became concerned about the fact that they hadn't been asked to take their seats again. And she was kind of grilling me about it. And the president, who was probably 15 feet away from me, noticed what was going on, and he came over and he said, is everything okay? I said, Mr. President, the agents asked if you would just stay put for a moment while they double check something, but you'll be seated. And then right then I got the word, you can send him out in 30 seconds. So I said, oh, Mr. President, just got the word, you're gonna take your seats in about 30 seconds. And he said, oh, I was a lifeguard, I can hold my breath that long. And I thought, the leader of the free world just walked across the room to make sure I was okay and to make me feel better about, a potentially awkward situation. And I just thought that that kind of epitomizes what kind of a person he was. He was very generous in spirit and just a kind, classy, old school kind of guy. I worked on the funeral here at the library when he passed, and I have two memories of that week. When the president's body was here lying in state, a lot of my colleagues had worked in D.C. And were preparing in D.C. for the state funeral, and I was here at the library. And so I sort of had the everyday person that was coming. It wasn't dignitaries and heads of state. It was just people who went out of their way to come and pay their final respects to him. And I will never forget the crowds of people who literally, stood in line for hours, and I just think that that spoke volumes about his popularity and his place in history in this country. When the 747, when Air Force One flew past the library on their way to land, and they did the missing man kind of wing wobble, I call it, it was just a perfectly scripted Reagan moment. I mean, the sun was starting to fade a little bit, and it was hitting the plane, and I was standing with Joe Brennan, who was a White House press lead, and he and I were here, and I just absolutely burst into tears. And it's one of my saddest but weirdly fondest memories of saying goodbye to the president. I really miss the way the president conducted himself. I miss the respect that he demonstrated for the office. I miss the respect that he gave the people who elected him. I miss the civility. I miss the ability for our politicians these days to work across the aisle, to be respectful of one another. And I miss his humility.